Okay, so last week, The Daily, which is the New York Times daily podcast, did an episode called A Wind Farm in Coal Country. And in a surprising and actually kind of refreshing way, it mentioned identity a lot, like the identity of coal miners and how it is hard for them to change oh my God, I'm already. Okay, I'm live streaming for the first time, and this is a little scary, so just bear with me. So yeah, I mean, it's talking about a big picture social change issue, right? The shift from coal to wind, and yet the phenomenon of identity came up a few times in a way that I found surprising and refreshing. And we're going to get into that momentarily. But first, I am Stephanie Lepp. You are opening the Infinite Lunchbox for a fresh take on what's going on. And today we're going to talk about the personal dimension of social change. So this daily episode, and I will link to it in the show notes. So the daily episode basically, what they're talking about is that, so wind energy has been this popular target for Republican leaders, but local conservative lawmakers are embracing wind farms because, surprise, surprise, wind farms provide jobs for their constituents, and they want to help their constituents. And they focus on this one county in Wyoming that's actually called Carbon County, and the mayor in Carbon County doesn't even believe in climate change. However, he still brought wind farms to Carbon. He fought to bring wind farms to Carbon County in order to provide jobs, and ended up losing his own job because of it. But he was very proud of the work that he did in order to, bring wind farms to Carbon County and to his constituents. And again, throughout this daily episode, Michael Barbaro and the reporter he's talking with, and forgive me, I'm forgetting her name right now, but mention identity. She says people have a lot of their identity in Wyoming wrapped up in coal. And, of course, it is clear that a transition, let's say just in this context, from coal to wind needs to attend to the element of identity, right? We need to, we actually do need to, I would say, have people on hand, I don't know, HR departments, to kind of steward the inner transformation required to go along with this external change, right? Because for coal miners, the coal industry, the fossil fuel industry isn't just providing a job. It's providing a source of meaning and purpose and identity. And if you're going to change your job from coal to wind, you're ultimately also being asked to, or being invited to, being challenged to change your identity in a way. I have no idea. And, but I can just imagine getting into these mines and going down there and feeling really strong and coming out with coal on your, whatever, your face dirty. That's part of what defines you as a person, and probably part of what you think defines you as a man and defines your manhood. I mean, I'm stretching here, and I should probably talk to someone, and maybe someday I will, and I would love to. And if you're a coal miner, or have been, or your dad was, or grandfather was, and being a coal miner is part of how they created their identity and sense of manhood, and you're willing to talk, get in touch. Let's say all of that, then yeah, you would probably need a little bit of help kind of changing your definition of manhood, or changing your identity, in order to make this change that is not just a change in jobs. And so, this kind of zooming out beyond just this kind of shift from coal to wind, I would say stewarding the inner side of external change, or let's say stewarding the personal dimension of social change, is also what drives this idea I've posted about, of, I'm just going to call them cultural eulogies. So yes, and let's just stay within the realm of fossil fuels for a second. Yes, we must move beyond fossil fuels, include and transcend. And Given that fossil fuel-based industries like coal and the auto industry represent, again, not just jobs, but meaning, purpose, identity, might it ease the transition to kind of honor our monuments to fossil fuels as they fall? Like in the same way that we eulogize people when they pass, might it be helpful for fossil fuel industry workers if we somehow kind of eulogized or ritualized auto factory closings or coal mine closings? You know, you know, yes, even if the majority of the country were to be kind of like on board with making this kind of transition, um, you know, it might help us make the transition to actually have kind of like a proper goodbye and a proper like it's not it probably wouldn't be a goodbye forever. It would be like a minimizing of given that we'll probably still have a diversity of different energy sources and et cetera, but it will be a minimizing, but it might ease the transition to yeah, to kind of ritualize it and like honor the role that the auto industry and the coal and I mean these industries played in the rise of of America, you know, and obviously there's so much negative to be said, and we're doing that. So this would just be kind of like, could it help us transition to actually kind of like to tend to the inner part of the transition? One of the most helpful frames that integral thinking provides, and those of you who know me have heard me talk a lot about integral thinking and integral philosophy, but one of the most helpful frames that I think integral provides is the way that it frames the difference between the left and the right. And caveat, like, I don't always think left right, you know, 2D spectrum is a very helpful way to understand the political landscape, but let's just think in terms of left and right for a moment. The way that integral thinks about it, which I think is really helpful, is that the left tends to focus on the external side, the external causes of problems. So systemic causes, structural causes, right? Like the reason that something is not working is because there is systemic, you know, injustice or structural racism, or the conditions, you know, have not been conducive to, you know, addressing poverty or homelessness, or it's okay. Whereas the right maybe perhaps over focuses on the internal, right? The ethics and the morals and the values, and the reason that this person is so poor is because they're not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, and they're not like taking responsibility for their own, you know, and like cleaning up their room. And it of course kind of boggles the mind why these why these could even in any universe be thought of as like either or, when obviously, you know, both dimensions are at play. And you know, we need to attend to the external and the like, yes, operate on the level of ethics and values and morals, as well as on the level of the structure and the systemic. But it does seem, and well, you know, I would say ironically, like I feel like I often see the integral world kind of going in circles on this point. It's like, should we start with the external or start with the like, should we start with the systemic or start by cleaning up our room? This is another conversation for another day. Obviously, there is positive feedback here, but I will offer an answer to that question. In another in another episode, but for now it does seem, therefore, per this frame of left focusing kind of on external systemic and right focusing on, let's say, internal, you know, let's say like values, morals, ethics, it does seem, therefore, that the stewarding of the inner dimension of these kinds of transformation, like the transformation in energy that we need in this country, could come from the integral right, right? If the right is kind of focused on the internal, then the integral right could theoretically kind of like think about how to attend to that. That's perhaps where the development of those ideas could live, which leaves me with then two parting questions that I'm going to leave for you. Question number one is, who is the integral right? I don't know. I have hypotheses. One of my hypotheses is that the integral right, um, it include like it is of faith. Is the integral right perhaps? I can just imagine like um, people who are on the right, who consider themselves on the right side of the political spectrum, who are people of faith, and let's say, who knows, like perhaps religious leaders who see, coal miners or like coal miners or auto industry workers who have lost their jobs, like come into their churches and come into their places of worship, like really struggling because they have lost their sense of manhood or their sense of identity. And these people, proto-integral right, let's say, seeing that and having compassion for that, and really, and perhaps like understanding the need to make shifts in our in in our in our energy consumption in this country, and also see the need to kind of tend to the internal dimension of those shifts. Okay, so question number one: who is the integral right? Specific people, organizations, community, like where does it live? That's one question I will leave you with, and if you have answers to that, I would love to hear about them in the comments. Question number two is, where do you see opportunity for this kind of stewarding of the inner dimensions of social change? I named two, like, ha, you know, let's say engaging HR departments to help fossil fuel industry workers with the internal element of these job changes. And I also mentioned eulogizing, closures of factories and auto factories and coal mines. Where do you see opportunities for attending to the inner dimensions of external change, or the personal dimensions of social change? And I'm going to call this a wrap. My first experiment. Thank you for bearing with my first experiment in live streaming. I'm Stephanie Lepp. You have opened the Infinite Lunchbox. And if you want more of the infinity of treats herein, please subscribe, like, share, and follow me on Twitter at Steph Lepp. Thank you.